Let's get to his reason as to why, because he's about to demonstrate he doesn't actually understand how prophecy works in the New Testament, which is, he should have left this section alone. He thought he was making a point. He just showed his ignorance on some issues here.
Another one just for fun. Using a random number generator, I got 110. So let's see what the 110th prophecy is. And the 111th is from the same section of the Bible, so let's do both. Psalm 40 is a psalm of David, so this is ostensibly King David writing a song of praise for God. The prophecies are found in verses 9 and 14. Verse 9 says, I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. Verse 14 says, let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether who seek to snatch away my life. Let those be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt. So, yeah, nothing really screams Jesus here. It's the author saying, I preached about deliverance in the first one, and praying for protection from people who seek to hurt him in the second. Sure, Jesus also preached about deliverance, but it's not clear that this is written in the form of a prophecy, and preaching about deliverance is a very common theme all throughout the Bible. It's not specific to Jesus. Same with divine protection from those who seek to hurt God's chosen people, though that one's kind of on again, off again, depending on how God is feeling about his chosen people on any given day. If these two verses can be about Jesus, then I don't see why John 1:20-21 couldn't be about Muhammad. Again, just for clarity, I do not think that it is actually about Muhammad. That would be absurd. I just think that if we're being consistent in judging what verses count as prophecy, the verse in John actually does a better job of pointing to Muhammad than the verse in Psalms does for Jesus.
Huge glaring difference there. The passage in John, all of John 1 completely contradicts Islam. All of John 1 completely contradicts Islam. So if you went to a psalm and someone said, hey, this verse is about Jesus, and the rest of the psalm just completely contradicts everything about Jesus, then you could say you got the same issue here. But at the bare minimum, if it's not massively contradictory to point to a verse, then it wouldn't be as bad as Muslims appealing to John 1 right from the get-go. Now, what are you thinking on that?
Yeah, I mean, he says,
because I think we're thinking the same thing about that. Anyway, go.
Yeah, well, he says we got to be consistent. The problem is that we are. He seems to think that like when we're doing or when Christians have done prophecy in the past, it's all meant to be literal. And a lot of the prophecies that are applied to Jesus in the New Testament are typological. The difference is Muslims are saying this is a literal prophecy. This is a reason to believe in Islam. We are not saying beyond layman fundamentalist circles. We are not saying these are reasons, because a lot of these passages that are being told are prophecies in the New Testament are typological prophecies. In other words, they're not literal. And I did a video on this back in January. And I'm just, again, grab slides from that. Okay. I cited very conservative scholars on purpose because I wanted people to know, like, this is not coming from like liberal scholars. It's coming from people like Paul Copen. He notes the Greek verb fulfill means something much broader than this. In fact, most instances of the word fulfill do not imply prediction. When Jesus came to fulfill all things which are written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms, he was bringing to fruition the significance of the entire Old Testament, much of which was not predictive. Adam sacrifices, the high priesthood, Jonah being in the fish's belly for 3 days, and so on. When we read in Matthew, this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Matthew means this was to bring to completion what was spoken by the prophet. Fulfillment does not exclude prediction, but it presents a much broader, richer understanding. We should think more in terms of foreshadowing or prefiguring rather than predicting. Note, there are two types of prophecies. Literal, like Zechariah 9:9, the Messiah is going to ride a donkey into Jerusalem, fulfilled in Matthew 21. But typological prophecies are like following a pattern. Jesus followed a pattern that was in the Old Testament. We're not saying like Hosea or the Psalm is predicting Jesus. That's not what the New Testament authors were trying to do. This is pointed out by Craig Blomberg. Again, another very conservative scholar. He says when the gospel writers use typology, they are often not claiming to be interpreting the meaning of the Old Testament passages cited, but rather showing how contemporary events are falling into a pattern so reminiscent of what God did in the past that they can explain the present only in terms of God's acting again. Thus, when Matthew says that Hosea 11:1 was fulfilled by the Holy Family sojourn in Egypt, he is calling attention to the striking coincidence that just as Israel had to be protected and delivered from Egypt in Moses' day, so now God's Messiah had to be sheltered in that foreign land until he could return safely to his home. Last quote, John Wenham, very conservative. He thinks he holds to Matthean priority, not Markan priority.
Mm-hmm.
He says, very conservative. Matthew is often concerned rather with the fulfillment of what is prefigured rather than the fulfillment of predictions. The words of Hosea were in the highest sense fulfilled in the flight and return of the Savior from Egypt. So, look, Vice Rhino, if we're going to be consistent, you need to be consistent as well. When Muslims, and what you did through, like, similar to them, when they bring up John 1:20, 19:20, they're saying that's a literal prophecy. What you did then is then you went to prophecies in the Old Testament that are typological. So you're actually not being consistent here. You're comparing literal prophecies that Muslims claim with prophecies that Christian scholars, ourselves here as well, say are typology. So this is not actually being consistent.
Yeah. Well, David, do you have anything? I got some slides on this too, but if you want, it looked like you were about to say something, David.
Oh, just I mean, guys, have you ever seen, if you were asking a Christian, hey, give me some prophecies about Jesus in the Old Testament, would you have gone to those examples as if you were asking for actual predictive prophecies of Jesus? No. I've never seen one Christian go to those verses as predictive prophecies. So yeah, as IP just pointed out, we're dealing with prophecies. We're not making the kind of claim that Muslims are making with those verses, right? So they're already making a completely different kind of claim. But yeah, when Christians are using, Christians are saying Jesus fulfills these things in a bunch of different ways. I mean, if you just take like the the Passover and so on, and the blood of the lamb being on the doorpost and so on, it's not like it's saying, oh, and there's going to come along and there's going to be a guy who actually is like this and so on. But you look at it, it's like, oh, I see how that's the fulfillment of something.
Yes.
And you have others like that with Abraham and Isaac, and hey, sacrifice your son. And Abraham says, okay. And then, no, don't sacrifice your son, but God's going to provide a lamb. It's not like it's saying, I mean, that you could say, he says God's going to provide a lamb. So that you could say that's a prophecy about something that's going to happen and so on. But with the father son issue and so on, and then it's like you can see how Jesus would be viewed as the fulfillment. So anyway, yeah, he doesn't seem to understand. He thinks exactly like a Muslim thinks about fulfilled prophecies, and then he's projecting that view onto anything we say Jesus fulfilled. And the only other thing I wanted to point out is, like, with Jesus, when you're giving like the long lists of how he fulfilled these Old Testament passages, it's also like a cumulative case. It's like you have all these different threads and issues and themes that are going along in the Old Testament. It's like, wow, this guy lines up with all of these things. And it's like, why would this one guy be the fulfillment of actual predictive prophecies and like tie up all these interesting threads that start in the Old Testament? And so when you see the list, here's a list and Jesus fulfilled these in a bunch of different ways, and it's a big cumulative case. And he's treating any individual thing on that list, any individual verse on that list, as if we're saying, you see, this predicts Jesus is going to come as the Messiah, and this is identifying him. And I've never seen one Christian arguing that, but he sounds to his audience like that's what we're arguing. And I'm just laying this down as a rule. If you say, hey, this is what they're arguing, and I've never heard one person argue that, probably got a problem. Sounds like a straw man.
Real quick. I'm not saying Christians have never done that. Maybe they have. I agree with David. I've not really seen it. But if that's the case, again, he said in his video originally he was going to take the best arguments. He's not doing that now. He's finding fringe fundamentalist views. He's not even going to like the scholars for this. How do Christians understand? Like that's problem. But yeah, go ahead.
That's what I was just going to bring up. Reminder of that timestamp at the 23-minute mark in this video.
Right.
Where he says, sure. Wait, no, it's not that one. Sorry. In the OG video, 4-minute. When I make videos like this, I endeavor to provide you with the best versions of the argument I can, given my understanding.
Right.
So yes, this list of 300 plus prophecies, scholarship doesn't treat it this way. Okay. This is not the best version of the argument. Actually, really quickly, I actually found where is it? I found the thingy that he got this from. The thingy thing. Here you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that list. Yeah.
This list. Okay. Can you just try to use relevant scholarship instead of like the stuff that's easy to target? Like, Mike, do we need to just start addressing our atheism instead of like Paul Draper?
Yes. Yeah, we'll start saying that, you know, Graham Oppie, Paul Draper, who is that? No. The best arguments for atheism are on Reddit, guys.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to our atheism and I'm gonna quote Skeptic 420.
There we go. That works. Yeah, it's kind of how this feels.
Yeah, and so Mike, you already kind of covered some of this stuff. So, just citing some other scholarship here, biblical interpretation in ancient Israel. As is well known, the term typology sees persons, events, or places, prototype, pattern, or figure of historical persons, events, or places that follow in time. Although significant and diverse examples are already known from the ancient Near Eastern sources, we have examples of this in Josephus and even from literature in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're commonly employed in ancient in the ancient rabbis as well, in the formulation of a manual in Rome. And the main point I'm trying to bring up here is like, this isn't a Christian invention. Like what you find in the New Testament is not the writers just manipulating the text in a dishonest way to force Jesus into prophecy or not interpret things as a Jew at the time would have. We have internal biblical evidence of this. We have the Moses traditions, the Davidic typology, the Exodus one, that's paradigmatic. I mean, just look at Joshua when the Jordan gets split so they can cross. And then they hearken back to the Exodus as a type of this pattern. Right. If you want to see how this is applied in the New Testament, one example is Dale Allison's Matthean typology. In the Second Temple period, again, in the Qumran scrolls, we have all sorts of examples of this. In this particular work, it's just highlighting, again, how you have Pesher, which is an example of interpreting the Old Testament in light of your current events to find a hidden meaning in it. But this wasn't people saying like, hey, this made a prediction. For instances of Dead Sea Scroll material where this is happening, I just highlighted all the different places you can find that. Other places, Sirach, Jewish, I'm not going to go through all this just for the sake of time. First Enoch has, and tons more. So fulfillment when it comes to this is a type, not a predictive prophecy. Did he cover Psalm 40?
Think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know of any scholars that reference Psalm 40 to the Matthew and John passages. If anything, Matthew 4:17 actually invokes Isaiah 9, and John 18 doesn't invoke any prophecy. For Psalm 40, verse 1, the law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. And then the author supports this by citing Psalm 40:6-7. And he says, therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, citing that passage. All that's happening here is the author of Hebrews is drawing on the Septuagintal reading of this passage where it says, a body you prepared for me. And he's just interpreting this as a declaration that Jesus is the paradigm of ultimate obedience. Yeah. That's all that's happening. So when they say Jesus fulfilled this, they're not saying it's a predictive prophecy. It's a typological fulfillment.
And again, if we're going to be consistent, I agree with David. I've not seen Christians go, oh, Psalm 40, haha, therefore Jew convert to Christianity. But Muslims will go to places like Song of Solomon 5:16 or John 1. And they'll be like, you see this line right here? This is a reason you should become a Muslim because this is a literal prophecy of Muhammad. And it's like, done this like 1,000 times. It's like, this is not comparable. So no, Vice Rhino is not being consistent.
And by the way, John, that passage in John 1, that is one of their top two from the New Testament, right? So John 14:16, that's their number one. The passage from John 1:19-21 is their number 2 argument.